Good morning, guys. Welcome back to the channel. Yesterday we were all together digging up potatoes from the back garden, and we were going to put up two archways for the beans and cucumbers to climb up, but a storm rolled through and we had to wrap things up. I did mention something yesterday that I didn't explain because we got interrupted by the storm, is that Rafa has a play date, and the reason that play date is important and that I thought it was worth sharing with you guys is that because we are going to see his mum and his rescuer. So he comes from a very bad start to life, and if you want to know that full story, I will link it below. But Amanda from Canberra Rescue, she rescued Indy, who is Rafa's mum, and her 8 puppies, and she found forever homes for the 8 puppies, including Raffy Staffy, but she foster failed with Indy. And so Indy is now in training to be a medical assistance dog, and they have come to the bay for a couple of days holiday. And we're about to go and meet Indy down at the beach and have a mum and pup and rescuer reuniting play date. So I thought I would take you guys along for what is hopefully a heartwarming day. We are back from puppy playdate, and I've just been to the hardware store to pick up a couple of things, including 2 more tomatoes. So one is a beefsteak and one is another Roma. And I got some marigolds because mine haven't really germinated from seed, so it needs to be done. It's really windy though, so I'm just going to get to work in the garden and we'll see how much we get done. The first place I wanted to pop a archway is here in this front part of the garden that we've talked about before. My hope was that it would let me use some of the vertical space, as these plants have grown quite a bit taller than I thought they would, and with the wind cutting through the garden, they have flopped right over. I've also started to notice some changes to the leaves of the straw flowers and some powdery mildew, so I have held back on putting up the archway because I was originally planning to put my cucumbers over the top, and I'm a little bit worried about my cucumbers getting powdery mildew. This was supposed to be a cottage mix of seeds and some small dwarf straw flowers, but as you can see, they've taken up quite a bit of that front corner of the garden and flopped right over, and they're casting much more shade than I anticipated. So vertical planting seemed to me to be a way around this. But first things first, Rafa and I had to pull out the existing support that I had quickly put in one afternoon, and we had to sort of push these plants up a bit more, both to reclaim some of the ground space and to actually push these plants into a more manageable size patch that might actually fit inside an archway. Once the plants were a little less flopped over, my plan was to plant lettuce behind them and use the unexpected growth and the shade they cast to actually protect the lettuce from the afternoon sun in summer. Lettuce does not need the intense scorching sun of an Australian summer afternoon, so to me that seemed like the best possible scenario. I still have a lot of work to do in the garden. I've got a lot of pea seedlings that came through, and ideally I'd like to plant all of them and all my tomato seedlings and not waste any of them. I did plant excess Cosmo seedlings, but I don't know what I'm going to do with them. My capsicum seedlings have been struggling. They've had such a poor germination rate, and they are growing so unbelievably slowly. I'm almost giving up on them. It doesn't seem to matter the variety. The germination has been terrible. I know we had a cold snap right after I planted them, but you know, it's an Australian cold snap. It wasn't like it went back to snowing. The other thing that's done really poorly so far and had incredibly slow growth is the basil and the cucumbers. At the end of autumn, I had a couple of tomato tiny seedlings left over, and I popped them in the ground, and somehow they survived winter and they're now thriving. I was hoping this basil would grow faster so that I could companion plant them and protect early fruit from various pests using basil. Anyway, so this is the area where we dug out the potatoes yesterday. There's still a ton of weeds along the edge. Along that edge and in this little pocket of corner here is where I plan to plant all the peas and the sunflowers so that the sunflowers don't end up casting shade on some of the other plants that will need it more. Then in front of them, I'm going to be planting things like zucchinis and tomatoes, and it just kind of depends what I end up having space for. I'm hoping to pop in some marigolds. And I was thinking that because my silver beets in the back corner there are starting to struggle with the amount of sun intensity in spring, that putting the archway here would be a potentially great idea, as it would cast a little bit of shade on them in the morning so they would get a little bit of break. The other option was to put it just here, and I was going to use this little patch of free space just here to plant my cucumbers, and they could go up and over the straw flowers, or it could go over the cousin it looking cottage flowers in that front corner and leave the space behind them for the lettuce. But I thought here would be a great place for the cucumbers. There's also some potatoes I forgot to harvest yesterday, and I was thinking about, can I plant a pumpkin in here, because I've only got 111 days or 110 days now left on my rental agreement for this house. Oh, these are lovely. And it's not an awful lot of time for a pumpkin to grow, and I was thinking about putting the pumpkin in the garden bed, but they take up so much space. So I thought at least if I could put it in here, then it might take up less space because it can just go over the garden. This actually is a much better harvest and much easier harvest than in the garden bed. So I'll probably use these bags for potatoes again in the future. There's tons of them compared to the other one, which means either I lost quite a large number, we've got one capsicum here. I meant to get another one to put here. Hey darling, good boy. I'm going to put the other capsicums in here when they are bigger than the teeny weeny size they are now. But all this is now various varieties of lettuce. Not that I eat a lot of lettuce, but had a lot of seedlings come up, so time to make the most of it. We've had a lot of wind. Things are falling over or getting blown out of their pots, as the case may be. I'm thinking I'm just going to call it quits on these onions. They've been there failing to do anything for months, and I think it's just some things that should be grown, that say they can be grown in winter, should not be grown in winter. And my garlic are just looking pretty sad. There's not a lot happening here, so I'll have to think of something to put in to fill up the space. A lot of snapdragon seeds to harvest, and somehow petunias survived over winter. And I thought this flannel flower would be more miserable because it's just in regular potting mix, crowded in with a lot of other things. But the flannel flowers that are in the Australian native soil look a lot unhappier, and they don't have blooms forming. Oh, starting little tiny bloom just there. But this one looks pretty sad. I was pretty impressed with the number of potatoes that came out of this potato bag. It was quite a big difference in the size and particularly the number of potatoes that came out of the bag versus out of the ground. But what I decided to do with the little potatoes from today and yesterday and with the green potatoes that were inside is to pop them back into the pots, whether it be my material pots like this one or into the pot where the garlic is looking worse for wear thanks to the aphid attack. I feel like calling it an aphid attack or an infestation really undersells how much damage they did to my garlic and how many aphids there were. So I figured these potatoes could go back in where they came from and we'll just see if anything happens. Can be an experiment and they can go in alongside the garlic and we'll just see how it works out. The tiny potatoes sorted, it was time to get back to today's job, which was planting some more tomatoes and other seedlings. I'm going to plant these tomatoes really deep. You can see there are little hairs on the stem, and if I can plant deep enough, then those little hairs can actually become roots, and it can mean a more sturdy tomato plant, which is really exciting. I've learned a lot about gardening with tomatoes over the years, mostly via mistake, so it is a bit of a trial by literal fire in Australian summer. It turns out that tomatoes really don't do well in our very hot, humid weather, but straw flowers do really well. So even just moving down to the coast, the climate is so different, and I'm dealing with completely different pests. Like, I've never seen so many aphids before, and you just have to kind of live and learn and die by the sword as you go. There's only so much you can research because the microclimate in each area is going to be different. This garden has taught me a lot already in the few short months that I've been working in it. I've seen how the excessive rains of our La Nina cycle affected everything. I've seen these pea plants go from being healthy to blight infested almost overnight. Sometimes things just don't work out, and that's why I've been trying to learn as much as I can about food preservation. Sometimes you're not going to get a great harvest, and that's just the way it is. And sometimes you're going to end up with loads and loads of celery that you can actually prep and freeze and end up with a 6-month supply before you even know what's happening. It's just a completely different environment for me gardening down here. I've loved having the opportunity over the last few months to experiment way more in the garden than I ever have had the opportunity to do so before. It's given me a massive chance to taste how different things taste if you grow them yourself. My life since moving away from Sydney has been different to what I expected, but it's been quite pleasant, and it's been, I think, a very needed perspective shift. My perspective has changed. When I go back to Sydney now, it feels stuffy and cold, and I've noticed how still the air is by comparison to living down on the coast, and I wonder if that is just because there's so many concrete buildings blocking the air from flowing through the city. And I think I've needed this space to just breathe and have time to experiment. Most of the tomatoes are planted in this back area where we pulled out the potatoes. I'm hoping this means that they can create some dappled sun for the silver beets, but that it allows them to continue to be full sun plants. I'm planting the sunflowers along this back wall so that I can have the beauty of sunflowers and kind of have the mini cut flower garden of my dreams without compromising how much space I take up and how much produce I can create. My hope is that the bees will be very, very happy with these flowers, and honestly, it makes me feel so full of joy every time I see bees in the garden. It never used to be the way because I was allergic to bees and I was always so scared of them, but now I can't say that I worry about it all that much. I think I've had bigger fish to fry, but I'm just so enjoying seeing how quickly everything changes in the garden and seeing how much everything that is meant to be will be. The packet might say you can plant this in winter, but sometimes it just doesn't work out. So In this patch, I've got tomatoes, I've got sunflowers. I put in some of the little tiny weeny potatoes that weren't worth keeping in the kitchen, and there's probably some more potatoes in there that I didn't dig up. And I've popped some zucchinis. The thing I keep forgetting about zucchinis is how much space they need. I keep seeing all this empty space around them, and I want to pack the plants in. But the zucchini plants get massive, and I really want my zucchini plants to be productive. I have planted a lot of them, including some golden zucchinis for the first time, and I'm really excited about having a bunch of zucchinis. When I first moved into this house, it was halfway through summer, and by the time I'd tidied up the garden bed and got things planted, I did still manage to get more zucchinis than I knew what to do with because it's just a one-person household. There is only so many zucchinis you can eat in a week, and I ended up giving a lot of them away to my friend. And I'm not a particular fan of frozen veg, so I want to find a better way to preserve the food that I'm growing and to be able to keep it long term. So I'm really looking forward to my freeze dry arriving and all the different ways that I'll be able to preserve the zucchini. I don't love having frozen veg because they just take up so much space in the freezer and they always end up with freezer burn. So I'm pretty excited about this new option. I'm not a fan of putting together things like these archways or any furniture. I always feel like you've given up your weekend to IKEA before you know what's going on. But luckily, I have Curious George with me, who is quite happy to keep me entertained and watch what is going on. As much as sometimes he can be a little bit full on, it is so lovely to have him keeping me company, even if he does sometimes dig up the onions or make holes in the garden to bury his goodies, or sometimes just want to shower you in a few too many smooches so that you will never get anything done for the rest of the day. He is a sweet little soul with no bad bone in his body who just wants to be part of everything. And it's so lovely to have that companionship, especially when you're living by yourself. It took a while, but finally the first arch was in place, and it was enough to make me firmly decide that today would be a one arch day. So it was a lot wider at the base than I thought it was going to be, and I'm going to have to put string in between each of the separations for the peas to climb up. But I was actually really surprised by how wide that base was. So let's go through what we got planted. We've got some snow peas here at the bottom that are hopefully going to climb all the way up. They are the Oregon Giant type of snow pea, and the same snow peas are along the back fence. This is where I planted the new Roma tomato and a couple of the marigolds. Yes, it is going to make the other Roma tomato behind it very difficult to get to, but the wind really cuts through on this angle and it's going to need some structural support to hold that tomato up, and that kale will be going at some point soon, and hopefully soon so will the celery, which will give me better access. And you can see my little golden zucchini down the bottom here. But right next to it is where I'm planning to put the basil if it ever gets around to growing. But this area is filling in quite nicely. I'm excited. There's still some space here for the capsicums that will hopefully come to fruition. If not, I will head back down to the local store and buy some more. So we've got some work to do along here. I'm going to be putting in the new silver beet seedlings in this little gap here. There is some lettuce just behind that needs to come out at some point soon. And there is a little zucchini tucked in here, and I'm hoping that the peas can climb up while the zucchini can fill in the ground space, and hopefully that will work out. I've got a little bit of gap here. None of my spinach bar one came up, so that's where my leeks are going to go. And you can see it is a very tall arch that will hopefully soon be covered in peas. Down this end, we've got more peas at the base of the arch and along the fence. That will hopefully create a bit of a barrier along here. And just in front of them is the sunflowers. These are I think they're a giant Russian sunflower, but they are definitely a giant variety of sunflower. We've got 2 zucchinis in there. These are both, I think, Black Beauty zucchinis, and we got some marigolds in front of them. And just behind that is the uh, beefsteak, which just feels like such a strange variety for a tomato. Beefsteak, tomato, and hopefully that will be very happy there. And I'm hoping that this is going to work out and we're going to have a wonderful season and not be too flooded in by La Nina. So that's all we've got for you today. I hope you guys have enjoyed hanging out with us on this windy afternoon. We really appreciate your time, and hopefully we will see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.